Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 17th, 2013 Board of Education meeting. I just want to let people know we are being videotaped, and we were in executive session discussing personnel issues. So if we can all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Flag is here this time. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I also want to welcome our participation in government students. If we go past 9 o'clock, we will take a break and you can come up and sign out. So we'll start with introductions. Lynn?
Lynn Lenhart. Kate Navarro.
Michael Cooper.
Jody Monroe.
Tom.
Diane Stever.
Matt Downey.
Laura Bierman. Charmaine Widgesinger. And Judy Kehoe.
Great. And first item on the agenda, approval of the minutes of the March 20th, 2013 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That carries. And Student Senate report. Do we have anybody from Student Senate? Okay, they may show up in a little while. Superintendent's report.
You could give me just a second as I unpack.
Come on.
There it is. Trying to make copies, so please forgive me. Do you have the copies? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Board of Education. Tonight we have an initial presentation, and I'd like to commend our entire art department, but definitely I'd like to ask Ms. Melanie Painter to please stand up. As there's been many great accomplishments, and Melanie regularly is an active subject supervisor that is really out there with her entire staff, and her entire staff really works hard for our students. And you may want to step out of the sunlight. But I'd like to turn the mic over at this point for a lot of great things that are happening in our arts programs. Melanie. Yes.
Well, first of all, March is nationally recognized Youth Art Month. So during the month of March, this is really my time for March Madness. You'll see me running around with artwork, schlepping things from one place to the other. But it's wonderful to see and celebrate the artwork that our students are able to do during those times. We had several exhibits this last month. They were all juried exhibitions. So not only did they pass the test here in the Bethlehem High School, they were also selected by jurors. So these are artists in the community, they're educators, they're college professors that selected our students to be part of the exhibit. They're competing against students from all over the capital region. So this is a great accomplishment for these students. And there are 3 shows that I'm going to announce the student winners for. And these are the Capital Region Media Arts Festival, which is currently on display at Niskayuna High School. The 22nd Annual Fulton Montgomery Community College Art Show, which is at the Perella Gallery currently, and also the 14th Annual Albany Center Galleries High School Regional. So these students also have artwork on display in the Albany Center Galleries as well. So if you haven't gotten a chance to see them, you can see them at all 3 of those locations. So I'd like to call up the students, and if you would, can I have them come up here?
Sure.
Okay. So I'll have the students come up here just to be recognized over here, and I'd also like to acknowledge before the students come up their teachers who are here to support the students, because it's not only their work here in the classroom, but it's also the guidance that the teachers give them throughout the day, throughout the after-school time while they're working on these projects. So I'd like to ask a few of the teachers to stand as well. Ms. Karen Carone, Ms. Marielle Martin, Mr. George DeRolf, and Ms. Jolene Rowe. All right, the following students have work on display: Stephanie Dutz, Elizabeth Weber, Natalie Cilia, Allie Rathjens, Quentin Mulvey, Alexandria Plowman, Eileen McGraw, Jenny Harris. If I've called your name, come on up. Nicholas Yurcott, Lila Johnson, Emily Boughton, Emma Leith, Kaylee Conway, Samantha Mosca, Kristen Gusatella, Bobby Lemieux, Emily Mueller, Kristen Durlacher, Rachel Begane, Jake Wiley, Camilla Walsh, Justine Marinello, Casey Vinciletti, Ryan Fleischer, Tara Teal, Cole Reagan, Evan Ginsberg, Morgan Lutenschlager, Amanda Crowley, and Nick Mashuda. And I also have one more announcement as well. Not only were these students selected to participate in these shows based on artwork that was in this competition all over the Capital Region, but several of our students received honors at these shows. Natalie Cilia won the Jurors Award at the Albany Center Galleries. Allie Rathjens also earned a Jurors Award at the Albany Center Galleries. Emma Leith received an honorable mention for the Fulton Montgomery Community College show. Emily Boughton earned a Jurors Award at the Fulton Montgomery show, as well as Jenny Harris winning first place in the dark room at the Capital Region Media Arts Festival. And Amanda Crowley and Lila Johnson won first place for their animation at the Capital Region Media Arts Festival. Thank you. So, thank you, Dr. Douglas, for allowing us to be here tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know, I can't express enough being at several of the art shows as well as the juried exhibition. But if you get a chance, please come out and see their work. I mean, it is a wonderful social time to also highlight some of the successes that Bethlehem is known for. And I want to thank all the art teachers because I know I've seen them in their workshops, their late night work, going out to these extra shows on the weekends to set up. Thank you, as well as all the other individual instructors that do many different things for Bethlehem. One of the things that's very proud to point of pride for me right now is a mock trial team that we're piloting this year. Last week, I think our last board meeting, we announced and recognized them, but they also, in their first year of competition, returning to the mock trial competitive stage, they went into the semifinals and they ended up defeating a very competitive team. And now tomorrow evening, I believe I have to check and I will get this out because we were just given the time. I believe it's 5:30 at the Albany Family Court downtown. They will be competing for the, I think it's the county finals, which will qualify them for the state competition. This is a great accomplishment, and this is from dedicated service from individuals who are doing their administrative internship in the district, as well as our professionals that reside in our community, helping to guide a lot of inquisitive individuals. Tomorrow night is really a challenge because they will be the prosecution in the case, and that really depends a lot on their ability to be very free-flowing, understand the content, and make viable objections to areas that they can stop the defense. So it is quite a competition, and you have to be able to go from both sides. So there's a lot of hard work. I know their practice schedule was, I think it was Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday to be ready for Thursday, and that's also competing around all the other schedules that these students are working on. So we will report on that as soon as we know, and I'll get that information out to the board. At the high school on Saturday, March 23rd, BCHS senior Andrew Wilkinson received the Intel Excellence in Computer Science Award at the annual Intel Greater Capital Region Science and Engineering Fair held at RPI. So we'd like to send out our congratulations to Andrew. Additionally, 2 Bethlehem music students, Eric Chang and Richard Sweeney, Richard playing the tuba and Eric with percussion, were selected to participate in the New York State Honors Band on March 1st and 2nd, 2013. Also at I believe it's the middle school, on April 13th, several of our students participated in the Regional History Bee in Syracuse, New York. I'm very happy and proud to announce that 3 of our students will move on to the National Championships in Atlanta, Georgia on June 1st. They are Michael Bartlett, Alfonso Pareto, Michael Connolly. Michael Connolly not only qualified for the Nationals, he was the overall highest scorer in the entire upstate New York region. Our 4th middle school representative, Sarah Cohen, did not make the cut, but considering she is only a 6th grader, she qualified for the regionals, and she should also be very proud. I think the middle school and Mr. Klugman is very proud and predicts that she will return in subsequent years and be very successful. So congratulations to those awards recipients who bring back pride to Bethlehem Central. As I end my remarks tonight, this is sort of the development of the end of the budget season. At our last budget meeting, we were talking about potential impacts of whatever state budget would be put into place. We later learned that it was being put into place on the evening that we were having our meeting, and we later found that some aid was restored in 3 different critical areas. We really need to make sure that the community understands that, yes, we did receive aid. However, not to be gloom and doom about it, we have to also understand that the aid was an amount that we originally started off projecting where we should be. So the state actually assisted us, and it's a favorable thing for the district, but it returned us to a flat level, and that's some of the discussions you'll hear tonight. All of these have impacts across the board, but we are trying as a board, as an administration, and as a community to grapple this and also move Bethlehem forward in the most fiscally prudent process as possible so that we can address these over the many coming years. So I want to thank everybody that's been participating here, coming out to the board each of the nights. That's why we've come to a larger venue of this last week. Some things that we have spoken about over 5 and 6 weeks preceding tonight's meeting are now becoming prominent in discussions. We would hope that throughout this budget process, as well as every future one, everyone gives some time to come and help with the entire process from start to finish as well. So we want to thank you, and I want to thank the board for the tireless meetings that we've had. So hopefully either tonight or the 23rd will be the end of our budget process, and that we will have established and continued a plan to prudency as we move forward. So those are my comments tonight, and I want to thank everybody for coming out, as well as the wonderful weather that we're finally starting to have. So.
Thank you, Tom. Jamie is actually here for Student Senate report.
Hello. So since April break, Student Senate has been getting back into the swing, and we're ready for all of our spring activities, which are busy. Actually, recently we helped out with Mr. Mooney's classes, collecting supplies as well as funds for BC alums who are now serving in the military. So that was a really rewarding experience. We sat outside with some other students and collected supplies for them, and also wrote some cards. Also, this week is our spring dodgeball tournament, which is always a big success and a highlight of the spring for us. And I think it's a great, not only is it a great fundraiser for Student Senate, but it also allows us to see the school spirit that we have at Bethlehem, which is encouraging, and it's really fun as the senators. We sit on the other side, and not only do we get to see the teams, but seeing the bleachers packed with friends cheering on their friends is a really nice thing to see. And Student Senate will also be helping out. We'll be working at the Scholastic Book Fair the day of the budget vote. So we're working on making sure that we have volunteers for that and showing our support. And we also will be hosting a blood drive in May, so we're getting ready for that. So it's been a busy but fun time for Student Senate. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Okay, next we have Board of Education report. Lynn?
Saying I attended the play, and
Yeah.
it was wonderful and lots of fun, and it's always great to see so many kids involved in that musical production.
And I had attended the BOCES annual meeting last week it was actually. And there were a couple different students from Bethlehem that were there, and they had done the culinary class had put on food for us and whatnot. And they did a great job, excellent job. The theme was Catskill, Hudson Valley region. And so they did different types of
And the
foods.
Adirondacks. And the Adirondacks.
In the Adirondacks, correct, yep. So I commend them on the fine job they did.
And Eagle Elementary with Mrs. Reagan did their first science fair last year. How many kids were there? It was unreal. The number of kids, I wasn't expecting that at all. It was crazy, and they were really like, the kids did the experiments. They made like the gook stuff at like Nickelodeon. They had all
the
kinds of
slime.
like little air cars. They had all kinds of stuff, how the body worked. The girl had the, like as if the intestines from a horse. They had all kinds. My daughter did the skis and why the wax makes them go faster and had ice cubes go down the skis. And it was great. It was unbelievable how many kids showed up. It was fun. Definitely. I thank you for doing that.
And it's great that the kids were doing the
The kids did the
experiments as
experience.
opposed
They
to
really did.
parents.
You could tell the kids did it. It was very fun.
I stopped into the career fair that was held in the main foyer in the hallways here this afternoon, actually this morning and afternoon at the high school. It was a great, I think the staff did a great job. Dr. Carr and her staff should be commended. A wide range of careers represented: the military, veterinary science, engineering, criminal justice, cosmetology, a wide range of possible fields. Students were really milling around the booths, asking a lot of questions. And the other thing is, I chatted with some of the booth vendors there, or representatives, and they all commented on how polite and courteous the Bethlehem students were. So that's commend Mr. Landry and his staff, teachers and staff, for working with the students, because everyone said what a great group of students they had here interacting with the representatives. So.
Is that it? Okay. Okay, presentations. We already did the art, so we're going to do the budget work session. Yeah, we switched that around.
Can I ask you, the slides that you passed out, were they the same ones that were on the portal?
Roughly, there was a slight minor change
Okay.
between a couple layouts.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is sort of a different type of budget presentation. It still is a recap, so we go over the same thing and we sort of beat you in the head with it. We don't mean to, but because the budget has changed a little from our last presentation to now, we still have to make sure we do our due diligence to ensure that not only the individuals that have come tonight, but those that also watch at home or pick it up on our website understand how the numbers have changed in some of the addresses. But tonight is really a work session for the Board of Education, because although this is a recap, there's a lot of discussion that will need to take place at the board level, and you'll sort of see us drift away to try to guide it from over here. So please forgive us as we move around. Tonight's presentation, there you go. Yeah. Tonight's presentation is really about recapping what has happened with the budget. Not only recapping what has happened with the budget, also explaining some of the positions with state aid and how it has impacted the budget with us returning to flat funding sources, as well as projecting the results and looking at our fund balance over the long part, because budgeting is not just about budgeting for the next year. It's also about budgeting and having a fiscal plan that will allow us to be able to work towards our next 2 or 3 years or the out years as we look at our spending plans and how one year sort of impacts the other. Decisions made last year have helped to impact this year. We have cut our deficit tax reduction from last year almost in half to cover everything with no cuts, but still that's a hefty increase. But that last year's budget set up this year's budget. So although the board is dealing with this now, some of the decisions and discussions that we make are also for next year, but also to set up next year's budget and the year after. And Ms. Kehoe will be able to comment on that. In addition, we'll have, at the end, we'll talk about what are some of the decision points, as well as our budgetary recommendations to the board from the administration as we've gone through the process, and then it will really turn to the board's work session. There won't be a lot of questions from the floor at this point until the board has their work session and their discussion. Then it will be up to the board how they choose to take any input, and I'll turn that over. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our Chief Financial Officer as she takes us through a quick recap. We are, for the members of the board that have seen this over ad nauseum, it will be quick. Thank you.
I never beat people over the head with the numbers. It'll be quick. This one, so. Okay. As Dr. Douglas noted, we got wonderful news when the state budget was adopted, and we, based on a projection using those numbers, we were able to increase or add back $916,000 to our budget. So this was great news for improving our position in the current year. It is, though, if you will note, about dead even with our current year's funding level. So basically we were in a very deep hole. We're out of the hole and we're now back on level ground, which when we looked at our projections, that was the position that we had hoped to be in. So in our revenue totals, we've updated that to reflect the $22,650,000. That was primarily with the restoration of the high tax aid that had been reduced close to $700,000 with the 70% reduction that had been proposed. There was an increase in the gap elimination adjustment as well, which also had been lobbied for quite heavily, and that was over $300,000. So a very nice improvement in the state aid picture for the district. One of the other provisions of the legislation was they imposed a moratorium on the building aid interest recalibration statutes. So these slides will actually give you a little bit of deja vu. When we started the budget process, we told you that the calculation was going to be 3.64% as your maximum allowable tax levy. Based on the interest recalibration, that increased to 3.75. Since they put a moratorium, we're back at 3.64. Based on the state aid change, bringing us up to $22,650,000, that adjusts our baseline revenues to $86,539,000. You'll note that the school tax line is still flat because that will be one of the decisions that the board will make either this evening or on the 23rd. And also the fund balance, how much of that will we be using? Our summary of expenditures is unchanged. That's at $90,636,000. That's a budget-to-budget increase of 2.76%. That number should be lower once the budget is officially adopted, assuming that there are some reductions that the board chooses to make. In some of our prior work sessions, the board had asked for some additional information, so we've just added a few slides to give you a quick update on that. One of the questions was, within the baseline budget, the $90,636,000, what were the additions that were included within those numbers based on changing program needs? Each of these line items are items that were covered within the presentations from the various departments. You can see that the net additions are about $444,000. The 678 represents the total ads, but I want to highlight that even though there is a proposed position add under special ed services, that was more than offset by reductions in contracted services. And that was for 2 additional positions that we had contracted out for that we were able to reduce those services. was for a speech therapist and for one teaching position. So the net is $444,000 included within those totals. You had also requested additional details on transportation salaries and positions. We added a comparative chart to show the number of employees that were included in the budgeted numbers for 12-13 versus those that are included in the 13-14. As we had noted, with all of the changes in the routes and the stops, that enabled us to save a significant amount of money in the current year. We're projecting that our total salaries will be around $4,150,000 for the current year. So you can see there is a slight increase going into the budget for 13-14. The supervisor's office and the dispatcher trainer line shows a 0.5 increase. That, in fact, was, as I had stated at the last meeting, is just a reclassification of an existing position from the other line items. So no change in FTE for those lines. And we also broke out the extra hours and overtime and substitutes from a single total on the original slide into additional detail as requested. The bus purchase graph that we had shown in the transportation presentation had just grand total number of buses. We broke that out on this slide for you over the last 6 years to just show you the number of large buses versus small buses, and then the total amounts that were spent. As you can see, we in fact, with our budget pressures, had scaled back somewhat on the total number of buses, dropping from what ideally should be somewhere between 10 and 11 buses per year down to the current proposal for 6 buses. And for the 12 or for the 13-14, it would be 6 of the large buses. Operations and maintenance, overtime details. The largest reason for fluctuations in the overtime totals has to do with weather-related events, usually snow and ice. Not so much for emergency repairs. I guess I'll chalk that up to good preventive maintenance on much of our building systems. That cost ranges from between $10,000 to $28,000 per year and is largely weather dependent. Our use of facilities overtime runs about $12,000 a year, and that's mainly generated with weekend events. Those amounts are offset within our revenues, though, because any overtime that's generated from the custodial staff is, in fact, charged back to the various user groups within the buildings. School activities overtime is also fairly constant. That's around $22,000 per year, so that's any activities that span into weekend hours. Plays and musicals and things of that nature. Stepping back into the main budget presentation then for tonight, the adjusted revenues compared to the expenditures of the $90,636,000 give us a gap total of $4,097,000. If we were to levy up to the maximum allowable tax levy limit of 3.64%, that would add about $2.1 million into our revenues. If we use the $1,750,000 of fund balance, that drops the gap to be closed to about $192,000. So a huge improvement from where we were prior to the restoration of those state aid numbers. You'll recall that when we looked into the crystal ball last year, at the close of the budget process, we had projected that the gap for the 13-14 year would be somewhere around $4.7 million. And in fact, we're down to $4.1 million now. So we were fairly close. I think the highlights for this is to note that in fact it is better than we had anticipated, and it reflects that we are, as we have planned on a multi-year basis, we're improving the fiscal position and closing the amount of that gap from one year to the next. So tonight, the big points of decision that we'll be talking about will be to what extent do we wish to make reductions to the program. It will be to what extent do you wish to use your fund balance. And then ultimately, what is the amount of the tax levy increase? Our goal is, of course, to get to a position where we have a balanced budget, where the resources that we're providing match the planned expenditures for that coming year. This slide I've updated again for you just to show you the range of reductions. We dropped, based on the restoration of that state aid, from, if we were to solve this with the pure levy increase, where it had been at 8.46%, it in fact now is down to 6.92%. If we use the $1,750,000 in fund balance, that would allow us to go to 3.96. Any of those amounts, of course, are above the tax cap limit, and that would mean a 60% vote. So to keep it to the 50% voter levels, you would need to adopt a levy that is at that 3.64% amount or below. Any amount that you go below will necessitate that there are potentially larger reductions that are required in order to balance the budget. When we had last presented our projected, crystal ball numbers for this current budget year, this was at the beginning meeting in February when we kicked off the budget process. And we had indicated that we, based on the savings from the settlement of the teacher's contract that occurred after the budget vote, and then based on the additional savings in transportation, we were going to be close to break even with our budget. We've now progressed another 2 months into the fiscal year, and based on reviewing the actual results to budget, we're showing that there's about another $700,000 below budget where we will come in from a variety of accounts district-wide, in addition to some of our fringe benefit accounts. So we're projecting that we're going to come in about 2.9% below our budgeted expenditures in the current year. We'll have to update that as we get further into May. We'll be getting into our cutoff of purchase orders, but this in fact is a good result. We ideally should be coming in below our budgeted amounts. It would be a far worse message if I were to have to come to you and indicate that due to unanticipated events, we in fact were needing to spend more than we had planned to spend. So that is positive news for the district. Based on that, looking at both the revenues, which will be coming in close to on budget, with the below budget amount on our expenditures, that will yield an increase in our total fund balance of bringing it up to about 8.278. This is also good news for the district because this is something that is watched very, very closely by both the state and by rating agencies. So this is something that we want to manage very carefully to make sure that we stay within the appropriate range of our fund balance. Okay. This next slide just shows you where we were with our actual fund balance numbers as of the last 2 fiscal years and where we project to be as of June of 2013. You can see that even with this surplus that is projected for this current year, we're still below the total level where we were in the year ending June 30th, 2011. We did drop down a bit last year because we had a loss of close to $1.3 million. So we'll be restoring a piece of that, assuming this projected surplus comes through for us. If you look at the various components of that, many of these line items are restricted based on these designated reserves. The undesignated is the amount that needs to be at or below 4%. Right now, I'm showing that if we do not make any changes in those reserve levels, and if we do in fact come in accordance with this projection, we would be slightly above that number, and that is something that we would need to manage, and we would need to increase those restricted reserves as one potential solution so that we would be below the 4% number. The tax levy trending. This history is also something that helps with some perspective on the budget. Where we are proposing a levy at or below the tax levy or I'm sorry, the budget change at 2.76%. You can see that's well below the 10-year average, which was at 5.33%. Similarly, the levy increase, which had averaged 4.84%, where we're looking at the Mattel at 3.64% or possibly lower, would also be below those 10-year averages. This is the longer-term crystal ball for the next 3 years. With a $90 million budget, our budget would probably increase somewhere in the vicinity of $2.7 to $3 million a year based on the increases that you'd expect to find in an operating budget. If you are using your fund balance and you're decreasing the amount that you would be using, those are the numbers that are listed in red. Currently, we're showing the 1.7 million because that's what we've shown as the estimate in the prior budget workshops. If you look at the tax levy increases going forward at around 3.6%, which again, it was pegged to the Mattel, you can see that that adds just over $2 million a year as a source of funding. That means looking at those gaps going into the budget and then applying some degree of use of fund balance and some degree of a tax levy increase, you can see that the amount of gap to be closed is in fact a declining amount initially. That means this assumes there's no increase in state aid. So that also would be something that we would hope to see from where we're flat this year. It would be nice to see a slight uptick. That would help minimize the need for other reductions down the road. And of course, we're constantly reviewing enrollment projections and what those impacts are on program. So it's really the same message as we've been looking at from our budget workshops. You have 3 tools that you can use in order to get yourself to a balanced budget.
One of the things looking at that screen that was just previously up is that as you look at the long-range plan, you have to also acknowledge that depending on what happens with state aid, in the 2016-2017 school year, if state aid remained flat all of those years, sooner or later you will face a potential challenge to the levy again, or even more reductions. This is just a hypothetical because the one thing we can't put up there is that state aid. So we have to be careful. That's what we mean by one budget impacts the other as well as future down the road. This budget now starts to set up the next year's budget. The numbers in red are probably the key piece because we are calculating in our budget what's known as a planned deficit. In other words, that red number, if we use 1.7 million of fund balance to support our budget for next year, we start off the following year already $1.7 million in the hole, and we either need the money from state aid to replace it or additional levy above the Mattel to replace it, to take care of the debt. Here, what we're showing is really, hopefully, a planned step-down approach. This is what was talked about during the fiscal cliff, to try to manage that. And here, you want to try to take even steps. These are potential hypothetical steps, but as you notice, you might be able to go down 500,000, but sooner or later you have to drop off. As part of the administration, we've been looking at this as we talk about decision points prior to adoption. And this is really where it's starting to turn to the board, because we only present the budget options, recommendations. The board has to struggle with that decision because ultimately you help to craft what the community finally approves or disapproves. And that's the crux of being a Board of Education member. It's one of the difficult parts. But these are the 3 points, and obviously we have to be aware of the decision points. When we look at those 3 decision points, as an administrative team, whether it was the building level administration to the district level administration, we've come together and talked about potential reductions. We've also talked about potential recommendations to try to develop from the plan that we've put into place last year with the generous support of the community on challenging to try to get to a better position this year, which we think our budget is starting to improve. Hopefully, we'll see some other favorable signs from the state in the coming year. So therefore, we would look at, we've used 1.75 last year. We would like to step down more. However, we feel at this point, administratively from the district level, that stepping down to 1.5 million would help in those future years. By doing so, we would be looking at, if we were looking somewhere around the Mattel, we'd probably be looking at considering reducing expenditures by an additional $471,000. That would allow us to balance our budget with the potential levy less than the maximum allowable tax levy limit of 3.64, and it would put it at 3.59. Now, the reason why you go down a little bit below it is so that there is no computational errors as well that could cause dilemmas in the outer echelons of the election if anything was ever contested. So you make sure you give yourself enough room so that the mathematical calculations are not there. This levy here would also require only a 50% plus one simple majority vote. And as far as the administration, we are looking at our reductions, which we'll show in just a minute for the board to discuss, in a priority that has been addressed with every building administrator and the district level to try to minimize as much as possible impact on total programs. It does not mean that programs will not have some impact to it. The problem is this budget is operating at a flat level for 5 years. In other words, for 5 years, taxes have gone up, but the spending plan has not risen to above what it was, I believe, in 2007, 2008, or 2008, 2009. Not many organizations run on the same budget year after year after year after year and not face some type of reductions. And that's the difficulty with putting together these types of budgets. Hopefully, we've bottomed out and we're seeing some of the potential restoration of items. I think that's an issue for the state to deal with over the next year, and we'd ask for all of your help because you were gracious enough to help us out during this year. Now, basically, it starts to go to the board with many decisions. The board's discussion really tonight, once we put up the list, is about where is the right balance point to get to that status right in there, which is our badge for Bethlehem Central, the balanced school budget for 2013-14. And so we turn it over to the board. I'm going to ask Sal if you can do the switch. We're playing with a little new technology. It's an A-B switch. So, but here is the list. This list was placed online as well, I believe, yesterday as we finalized it. This list right here is a working document, so I'll be sitting over here and just taking direction from the board. However, this is a priority list, not like the list that was previously put up that was just by categories. This has been reviewed by the building level administration and the district level administration, and we can answer any questions that the board may have at this point.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question about the fund balance amount, the 4.2% that you're projecting for the end of this year, and technically we can't be over 4%, and you said we would manage that. What does that mean? Don't we have to be at 4% before the end of the year, or can we end the year with 4.2% and then we manage it, or?
If you'll recall, I do come back to the board usually at our June meeting, and we look at where our updated projections are for the current fiscal year, and then we also look at those restricted reserves. So we're looking at, are those levels appropriate? For instance, the workers' comp reserve, we're self-insured. We look at the numbers of claims that are outstanding, and we determine if that amount is appropriate. So as part of that review and looking at the reserves, as part of looking at the updated projected actual numbers, we will make whatever adjustments we need to at that time in order to make sure that we come in below that 4% amount. So we do have time before we get to the June 30th year end.
Well, I guess because part of my question is so we have to end the year at the 4%. We can't say you're managing this after June 30th.
No.
Okay. So right now, your best guess, however, is, I assume, since you put estimated 63013 for all those other categories, the restricted ones even, that's your best guess of where they should be.
I have not looked at the updated numbers based anecdotally. I don't expect any major changes, but there's a whole calculation and a review that has to go on looking at those numbers. We're updating the employee benefits accrued liability reserve. I can't do that until we get further into the end of the year. Those numbers are typically going up. So there's more review that's needed before I can give you the recommended levels.
Is there any way, and this is kind of creative financing,
Ooh.
to somehow, some of these things that we're talking about possibly cutting, and I know obviously the positions we can't, is there any way that they can get moved into this year's budget and use some of this extra reserve? And I know I say extra, realizing it may not be extra reserve, but to pay some of those things before June 30th so that we don't have to cut them in next year's budget?
Actually, I'm even thinking with the technology, with the online assessments, I guess I thought that was part of the bond, but could you pay for the online assessments now and use that money? And then we have 200,000 extra in the budget.
You would have, as a board, I would have to be mindful that a budget spending plan is a budget spending plan that's been approved by the voters. If that was not necessarily discussed as much as you can in a budget, because not all the detail of a budget is discussed openly, then that would not be the intent of the use of the money, which could cause potential problems. It may not.
What would be the category that that kind of thing would be under?
That would be most likely a transfer of funds.
No. If that had been in the budget, what would the category that would have been in?
Most likely, depending on the cost, it would probably be equipment, or it could be, depending on the cost, it could be classified as supplies. You have the whole plethora of each of your spending codes to be able to do that. Equipment, however, is one of the most difficult because you are approved up to a certain amount of equipment funds to spend, and if that's what you put into the budget, you are not allowed to go over that amount.
Well, but you're saying it might not be equipment. You said it
could be something else, yes. And that would have to be sufficed through potential transfers, yes. There was a whole thing.
Is it possible?
There's always a possibility. We'd have to check with legal on that as well, because this was something that was discussed in, I hate to say it, the first Mario Cuomo's reign in 95, 96, 97, and there was some potential issues that came up out of audits at that point.
I guess I hate the idea of putting it into a restricted fund if we might not really need it in that restricted fund. I'd rather be using that money to pay for things that we're talking about cutting in the budget.
Right. One of the things both Judy and I have talked about it at our administrative level is if it got to that point where you put it into a reserve, or what's known as a restrictive reserve, you've got to make sure you do not place it in a restrictive reserve that you do not have access to as a board. There are reserves that currently the board does not have in play, such as the employee retirement reserve, which if you look at the EBLAR, or the Employee Benefit and Liability Reserve, when the district placed $1.4 million into that, there's only a specific reason you can access that. However, if in hindsight, and it's only in hindsight, that money was placed into the ERS reserve, which is entirely different, you would have been able to access that up to 1 year's donation for covering the cost in that to use towards each of your future budgets. So you'd have that access no different than you do in a way of your unrestricted reserved fund balance, that 4%.
Can I restate what you said to see if I'm understanding it?
You'll probably state it simpler.
So are you saying we could put this into one of the restricted fund accounts and still be using it next year to offset some of the increases in that restricted fund next year?
You can do it that way to offset some of the expenses for that specific reserve fund. Or you can use it so that it is sort of a savings account for the next year's budget that you can access for the 13-14 budget as part of your reserves or fund balance use or your planned deficit.
But it would still be in the restricted account, not
Yes.
in your undesignated.
Correct, but you have access to it.
I mean,
It's easier to access.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Each reserve has different rules for how you can get to the monies. Dr. Douglas is absolutely correct. The ABALR is highly regulated, very tough to get to. But the retirement contribution reserve, you have much more flexibility. The more you have within your reserves, it puts us in a much better position in terms of the ratings agencies. It translates into lower interest rates, and it gives us this longer-term stability and flexibility. Part of our goals has been to, if you looked at that 3-year projection slide where we went from 7.7 down to 4.1 and going lower, we're trying to close that gap, and by preserving those reserves, it helps us do that sooner.
Yes, but I would like to hope that the figures that you give us are probably pretty accurate, or I understand they're estimated, and that they're hopefully pretty accurate, that that's what you think we're gonna need in those restricted funds. So why put more into the restricted fund if we can use it for some of these other expenses?
Yeah, and if you get to the end of the year, that's one of the hard things. We're taking a snapshot right now with projecting that that's where it's be. I mean, one good issue could come up, and all of a sudden that's not the case. That's the problem. Yeah.
How much are we talking about? What is
About
the
$160,000.
Yeah, under 200,000.
Under 200.
Yeah.
Okay, it's still money.
Mm-hmm. It will help in any facet.
My recommendation would be that we consider going back to the 1.75 million in reserve usage rather than the 1.5 that's being
But that
suggested.
doesn't help us before the end of June. We have to get rid of this point.
No, I understand that.
Can that money, I know you want to kind of get with that resolved, could that money go into the 100,000 that we're going to put aside for the capital improvements for O&M? Can it be put in that account?
That's really part of the budget. I mean, that's in next year's budget,
With
so.
the capital reserve, not the capital reserve.
outlay?
With the capital outlay, you actually have to build it into the budget one way or another, and the voters would have to vote on that.
In order to
That's why you
qualify for
can't
that
just
80.
expend money now for something future, especially in that avenue, without the voter approval.
I thought, my understanding was that the voters approved a set dollar amount, and how we expend that, really, there's discretion within the district to do that. I mean, we set up appropriations, but if one appropriation is overspent and the other's underspent, there's transfers within the appropriation. So I would hope we'd have flexibility there, and that if the technology appropriation isn't expended, or we want to expend more there because we have money, excess money in some other category, that we would do that appropriation and do what Laura had said.
I agree. You generally have that flexibility to do transfers between line items. However, the equipment is in a special classification of codes. You'll hear when we're calculating on the budget newsletter that goes out, we have to break out the contingent budget and show the costs that are would potentially come out if we went into a contingency budget. Those codes for equipment, as Dr. Douglas said, what you've approved for your total amount, you don't have the ability to put more in there in the current year. Once the voters approve that limit.
that you know you're gonna need next year.
We will look at that and see what can be shifted. Again, we're trying to finalize the orders for the current year, so we know exactly how much is left and projecting out on the revenue side as well.
And then I have one more.
different projects and purchases too, on your, this one, on your cut list for 94,000. Can we not defer them?
Yeah, and a lot of that is in the contractual, so that's the type of thing that we can do. So you're talking about basically non-recurring types of expenditures that can be shifted into this current year to spend down, so.
Yeah, the non-recurring is always favorable. The equipment is difficult, like I was just sidebarring with Sal, just because he's almost at the end of his equipment line, which most likely means if everybody else spent their equipment line, which most individual departments would do, and we're at the max, we would not necessarily have room to be able to go over that. If nobody spent their equipment line, then we could possibly transfer that in to use that fund
There's
now.
gotta be other lines you can use it for. Besides equipment.
Yeah. There's potential that we could use that 160 throughout to either better position for this year or not. There's also the position that you could, I would have to look at it, that you could forward that forward
to offset some of your fund balance, because it does fill a hole. Remember, whenever you use fund balance, you want the money the next year, you want to know where that money's coming from to fill that hole. That way, the hole's not a planned deficit.
Yes, but I don't want the comptroller coming back and yelling at us because we're over 4%.
Right. I will guarantee you, one way or another, we're not going to end a budget season over 4%. That the board has control, Judy's office definitely has control. That's why you usually have that late meeting in June to make sure that you're under it. And you really need to be under it usually by at least 0.1% because of Medicaid billing that can come in over the summer and then all of a sudden put you over.
Just for clarification, slide 21 that talks about the current projected savings from the current budget we're in, is that reflected in slide 10 for the 2013-14 numbers? Is that up to date?
That number that is on slide 10 for 12-13 is your budgeted numbers. It's not your projected actual.
Okay.
So, and you'll note what's on the, there's the 88,203 that's on slide 10. If you go up to slide 21, it references the original budgeted expenditures of 88,203.
Right.
Right now, we're projecting it would be about 2.5 million below that total.
Right, but again, the 2013-14 is what we're saying are the expenditures that we're working off of for our budget.
Correct. So everything that's built into that baseline budget now for 13-14 totals the 90,636,000. So
it doesn't take into account the surplus that we have in this year's budget?
No.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions. And this is on the priority potential reductions list. I just want to make sure I understand the issues and some of the numbers. So, on that first one, the first small building projects, is that the addition that you suggested in the summary of additions on slide 12?
Yes.
Yes.
It is. Also on the tech number, the priority number 20, the deferral of the tech is listed as 200,000 there, but in the additions it's 225.
There was an additional service with that, I believe. There was the tech and...
We upped the equipment budget from $300,000 to $325,000 to cover the purchase of a firewall.
Okay. So the reduction is only part of the addition?
Correct.
That you had
Correct.
suggested. The numbers 14 and 17 on the reductions list is art at the high school. Jody, do you have a sense of how that might affect the program, or is Ms. Painter still around, or?
Yeah, what we're doing.
Numbers, yes, it's 14 and 17.
17 is foreign language, is that what you have?
No, it says art.
Under D.
Art.
No,
Under
under
D.
D.
Oh, no, those number 17. Right. Those ones are down further because that would essentially, we wouldn't be able to offer classes that kids have requested.
Okay, so basically we have requested.
Yeah, that is why the position was split like 0.3, 0.2.
Okay. I think that's it. As we get to discussion, I might have a few other questions. The other thing I will just comment, I think it's great to use, if we have money that can be used creatively, we should investigate that cautiously. We don't want to come across as jury-rigging things, and obviously we would have need legal counsel, but there's the reality and there's the appearance, and whatever we do, I agree, we should explore how we can use money that is, quote, left over, if it in fact is, but we have to be very transparent on how we're doing it and making sure that the public understands, should we go forward with that. I hear you, but.
They're gonna understand when the comptroller comes and penalizes us because we're over 4.
Well, that we want to avoid, but we also.
Over the years, and actually, fund balance was, you were only allowed 2%. It only went up to 4% a couple of years ago, and it was never an issue, and that's in the good times when we were actually adding things to our budget.
Right,
So
obviously, we have
it
to
always worked
maintain the
out.
correct level, but I just don't want the public to feel like, oh, well, you know, they're kind of moving this and
They'd
moving that.
appreciate it.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just, move forward, but with caution.
Okay, yes, Kate.
At the last meeting, I asked you about the high school monitor. And yeah, you had one down as going, and I asked you if it was able to cut more. And not cutting more, are you saying that they're more important than the things that you have on your list?
Not saying that that's more important, it's the operation. Basically, what happens is there's contractual obligations and there's the ability to cover. If, I believe the question was, remove the monitors, put the teachers in the hall. Teachers are already in the halls. There are monitors as well. If you remove our monitors as well, supervising the space, what happens, the high school administration says they're going to have to take more teachers out, and then there's going to actually be other areas, such as study halls, as forth, that will not be covered. So it's sort of, you may do one thing, but then you create another hole. That's the problem that was explained by the scheduling process as well as the contractual
And we
obligations.
need as much monitoring as you're saying.
Right now, this is about a 250, I believe, if Greg's here, I think it's about 250,000 square foot with over, I think, 32 or 36 possible separate entrances. And we have an open campus. I believe there's 6 or 7 monitors. And there's one monitor that we found that there was duplication. But as far as the lunch duties, the hall duties, we would, from what I'm being told, and I'll ask Jody to confirm, we would not have the staffing to cover all of the other student assignments that would have to be covered by instructional staff.
That's true. One of the things that, because of some of the reductions we've had, first of all, we put underclassmen in more, we assigned them to more study halls a couple of years ago to make sure we could account for kids. We also have more kids in study hall because we have less course offerings that we had 3-4 years ago. Teachers are assigned hall duty, study hall duty, and things such as that, but the reality is because of those additional supervisory assignments, we would not be able to safely monitor the school if we were to cut additional monitors at this point.
It's sad that the supervisory overshadows the academics, and that's what's happening, and I guess I don't get it totally.
And Dr. Navarro, I understand that, and this is one of the things we talk about regularly. The hard part is everybody does understand. We understand the word run the school like a business or run this like this and so forth. There's always the analogy, and what we talk about at the administration level when we get that is sometimes the decision has to be made, sort of like with operations and maintenance, that we are going to have to sacrifice some academics to maintain the facilities. Only right now because of financial crisis. Before, you may not have had to do that. But at this point, you're at 5 years of reductions. There's becoming very little room to do anything because sooner or later, the reductions have to come from other places. In the form of maintenance, maintenance has deferred. You have the bonding situation. We have capital outlay. And if we don't address that and we keep cutting maintenance, we just grow our problem. Sooner or later, if you want to do a program and you don't have the maintenance to run it, we may not have a facility. I mean, and that's taking things to extreme. But it's no different than, I like to use, GE has administration, supervision, workers, sales, and so forth. You take any one piece away, sooner or later something happens. It may not happen as much, but if all of a sudden you take all of the middle management away, the company will go along for a while, but sooner or later problems will develop. You take all the workers away, the management will be there, problems develop. So it's sort of a give-take. You've got to sort of find where that balance point is. I can tell you this school, in my year and a half, you've reached that balance point probably last year. You're teetering on that in these levels. That teetering point between what we can probably do is still be harmful and what we do and start to reduce programmatic permanently until we have funds to restore it is somewhere around level 11, 12, 13. Because once you get there, you start seeing educational programs, even though there's educational programs above, we can still offer our full style of program. We just may not offer it in the same way. It's a restructuring avenue. And that's whether we have capacity. And that's what we deal with is data points that not everybody really sees. They hear the emotion, and there's emotion in every one of the administrators here. We do not want to cut a darn thing. But we also have to balance a budget, and so far, sometimes we have to take the emotion out, and we have to lead. And that's what we're trying to do, and I know that's what the board's doing.
And I want to, I just want also to finish, I agree with Mike, stay at the 1.75 for the fund balance. If you do that, you only have to decrease the cuts to 221,000 versus 470,000. I'll just get it all out now. I don't believe in reducing a full level of sports. I think you only reduce what is not possible for the kids. If nobody's playing, which we learned today, freshman lacrosse, obviously we can't have a freshman lacrosse team, but there's at least 6 or 7 teams in every other thing on this chart that you gave us. So I will take that out the way it is, and you're still only going down to number 4, or number, 7 on there, and you're done.
Yeah, I still,
So, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Laura.
go back to the deferring the purchase on the computer assessment hardware. I forget, when is state ed forcing us to do this?
I believe it's roughly, we're supposed to be ready for the 14-15 school year, piloting 13-14.
So you could delay putting them in for you?
Well, there's the problem. We are estimating it will cost over $800,000. So if we delay, you're looking at an $800,000 potential hole for next year's budget. If we do this right now with $200,000, like we had mentioned, phasing it, 200 this year, gearing up, and then additional 200 next year, now you have the purchasing power of about 600, and by purchasing early, we may be able to cover that extra 200. That's what we're hoping.
Will you refresh my memory? Part of that's not in the bond?
No,
Technology with the assessments?
this part is the hardware piece, and the bond is the infrastructure piece to be able to operate even the concept of that online assessment.
Would you repeat?
So why would we want to get the online assessments if we don't have the infrastructure in first?
Well, it sort of goes hand in hand. I mean, if we have this in the budget, we probably will not purchase until the very end of next year to try to increase our purchasing power.
Diane, could we just have the figure again if we do the 1.75? What was the amount that needs to be cut then? 221.
Assuming you go to the maximum
To
allowable
To
tax.
3.59.
To 3.59 or to 3.64?
3.64.
No, 364, which
It's 192.
to 192 and change.
All right, so what is it if we do 1,700,000, whatever?
Wait a minute. Can we get the chart back up maybe? Or
Which chart would you like?
the one that,
And
the
do it at
recommendation.
It's page 19.
Thank you.
Maybe we're going through it backwards. Maybe we should talk about what we can't live with.
Wait.
Well, that's one of the reasons for the priority
Right, the
list, to tell
priorities.
me if you want to change it.
Right, well, let's kind of look and see what, right, that's true.
It's a
Well, if we
three-legged
use the-
stool, that's the problem.
We use the 0.22. That was how much?
Right, then you don't have to cut anything.
And I know the board's going to struggle with this no matter what. The reason why we put 1.5 is because we have to step down. If we stay up at that level, we have to come up with an additional $250,000 next year. Then next year's budget, we would probably be going from 1.5 down to hopefully 1.2 or 1.0
If we
million.
don't get state aid.
Well, even with state aid, we've got to lower that deficit, because next year, I'm hoping that it will be a good year. It's everybody's happy year. It's election time. The problem is, I'm more worried about 2 years out, and if we have the same leadership, that 2 years out, it's, let's go back to 3 years ago, and I'm not giving a cent. Then we're in trouble.
But Tom, we planned 1.75 in this current budget.
Correct.
And we didn't even use it. In fact, we have the surplus.
Right, you have the ability. If you
Right.
used 1.75, however, this year, we probably wouldn't even be able to start at 1.75. We'd probably be down in the 1.2 million area because we would have less access to be able to fill that hole. This is the problem when you look at other districts. They're coming out, and they're actually, what's happening is a lot of other districts are increasing their use of reserve or fund balance. We don't have that opportunity. We're actually becoming financially stronger, even though we're making some of those difficult decisions. I can't say that about some of my colleagues' districts. They're making difficult decisions, but it doesn't mean that the next year, it's sort of like we're all hoping for something to happen. We probably have to take charge of where we're going to go and also try to defend what we have as best as possible. Now, with the 1.5 million, we would probably, even if you took every cut down to $470,000, we would probably say to get the district in a better position, which is exactly what the community said in the bond vote, is start taking care of these things. We have the ability to restore $100,000 in the capital project that would be cut. The reason being is next year, once you spend it, you develop your own fill with 70,000 of that right off the bat in state aid the following year. So that's how you have to think about it. In a way, that's sort of like what I think Mr. Cooper was saying. If you raise it, we just have to be able to plan for how we're going to, in other words, if you make that decision this year, next year, we have to take a bigger cut at that fund balance, sort of like what Matt said.
Maybe.
We may, but I'm going, I will tell you, I will prognosticate this right now. If you do not step down at a select interval over the next 4 years, you are definitely going to face a tax cap challenge. Okay. Just because of the fact state aid is not going to fill that hole unless they come up with a miracle and restore gap elimination adjustment. That's the only unknown that we know of.
Well, I would agree with Kate to go to the 1.75.
Well, I'm going to suggest a process issue. Before we even, I would be willing to consider that. I'm not sure I want more advice from the folks who know the numbers. Can we look at the cut list and just see,
What we can live with? Well, that's what I was going to say.
Because if we can come up with the level of cuts that you need,
Yeah.
then we can stay at 1.5.
Well, what you would want is to go down to what?
Let me ask you this, because I don't want you to focus. This is what we did last year. We did not focus on where we get to first. You positioned everything with any final discussion first. Then we went down and showed with your positioning where it plays out in the general total. That's what the board asked for at the beginning of this. So you've had our priority of how we would rank them at this point, and we can discuss it. Is there anything you feel should be moved? Because here's the worst case. If a vote went down, now you have to come back. If a vote went down twice, everything on this list would be removed, and we'd probably have to come up with, I think, about another $1 million. So this order, a lot of these items are from last year. We've sort of broken them apart. Wherever we're here at the end of this budget process, besides what little changes happen between this year and next year, that's where we start next year. That's really where we're at, unless something significant changes. So if you get this close to the order, or if you accept this as the order from all the administration, that's where the starting point is. Then down below, I'll pop it up, but then there's a little tool that you can play with that says, if you use this much fund balance, this much tax levy, this is how much in a reduction. I can show you exactly where it plays out.
Sure. I know that 100,000 that's on the top, I tried to go back and I reviewed films from our community forums, and I actually went back. I know you provided us with the comments from those surveys, and I read the 700, and I went back today and read the first 300 just to refresh my mind. The community, through those community forums, told us they wanted that $100,000 up there. Is that the same thing? The reserve account.
I mean, they would like us to put $500,000 into our budget for it.
Right.
We can't do that.
They
We can only do a
start
maximum.
They wanted us to start a building fund. So and yet the first thing up there is that. So I would, for the board to consider is, the community has consistently told us, start a fund to take care of some of these smaller projects. So I would like to see that move down on the list, but I don't, just because they didn't say cut
social worker, cut a science teacher, cut a health teacher to give me that 100,000. I mean, it's just esoteric. Of course, we want 100,000 in there, but I don't think they want to give up sports. I don't think they want to give up social workers. I certainly don't want to see art go. I certainly don't want to see foreign language go. So, of course, we want that, but I think just deferring, putting it aside, like you said, we're not in the position right now to be taking $200,000 and just throwing it away. And I agree with you, planning for the future, but not at the sacrifice of the kids that are here right now. That's the problem.
And I respect that. I have the obligation to bring forth a plan to the district, and then we adjust it from there.
Okay, let's start with where we're gonna go with the fund balance. Let's start with that and get our numbers there. So I know, Laura, you wanted to stick with the 175?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially in the position that you've shown us where we're at in this current budget and ending up with a surplus, I definitely would recommend going with the 175 for next year.
Mike, you already said that. Kate already said that. Lynn?
I'll go along with the majority. I was going to say, I'd give a middle of the road, like 1.6.
Well, we can get there, but.
Always the outlier.
Just so I understand.
Well, remember, we can try.
Tell me again why you're at 1.5, just so I fully understand why it's 1.5.
One of the plans that we came to the board last year was we were looking at our fiscal plan over 3 years. You have so much fund balance that you can access, which is, I think, roughly 3.8. 1.7 is almost 50%. So if you use that analogy, you use almost 50%. The next year, you have to use 50% of that. And then next year, 50% of that, if there's no replacement of that fund balance, to step off. Sooner or later, you run out. If you lower the amount, you lengthen that point. If you lower the amount and you can refill it, you have tools to fight another budget cycle. We're trying to get into that healthy position that if something else goes wrong, like I said, I don't know how other districts, if something else goes wrong, I don't know how other districts are going to deal with it when I'm seeing 6 million in reserves, 5 million, 4 million, 3 million in reserves being used by other districts similar to us. We were at 2.5, I believe, the year before I came. We went down to 1.75. We had wonderful help from our units and negotiations, our bus drivers, our community, that helped us get to the position that we are in pretty much for this year. And then that's factored into the budget. So if we don't make that plan to start moving along that lines, we're at the same exact position we are, which we can do. But the next year, we have a bigger decision to make if there's holes not filled in.
Diane,
Yeah.
how will that affect bond ratings if we go from 1.5 to 1.75, especially since we'll be obviously going out for bonds?
Yeah, recall that we had a credit rating reduction about 1.5 years ago, and the concern that they cited was declining levels of fund balance, and they weren't comfortable with the longer-term plan for replenishing that. So stepping down off of your use of fund balance so that you can get to a balanced budget position and keeping your fund balance levels not only at close to 4% as possible in your unrestricted fund balance, but also maintaining appropriate use of reserves is a very positive thing for the rating agencies, especially when you have the uncertainty in the state aid picture and the volatility. I mean, we are having a good year this year in terms of budget to actual, but there have been other years where unanticipated things happen and you end up spending more. So that, you can go within that range of 1.5 to 1,750,000, but you just, again, eyes wide open. You need to understand that it could potentially impair the position going forward. It could affect the bond rating.
In other words, the easier decision made now could result in a much harder, it may not. Just eyes wide open. It's like, we tried to tell everybody, for us, doing the budget's the easy part. Once we have these numbers, we can do the budget. Until we get those numbers, it's like juggling elephants. So up here, I have basically the tool. If you don't change anything, the initial budget gap of 4.097, fund balance use, if it's at 1.75, means now we have a gap of 2.34 million. 1% of our tax levy is equivalent to 5.92 thousand. That means there's a potential tax levy that raises funds. Right now, we have not set that. At that, and the tax levy, right now, if the tax levy was 0, we'd have to cut 2.34. We do not have that amount of cuts. That's contingent right now. So if we go 1%,
What are we recommending? Let's go to what we want.
Go to the
okay,
3.59.
let me type that in. I think the cell all of a sudden changed.
You're up, go with the yellow top line. Yeah,
Wait a
touch
second,
tax
that's why.
levy. Escape.
Glasses, you know they hurt you. There we go. Let me just go back. I do.
No, he's just making
No,
it zero.
I'm just clicking to clear the cell. So 3.59. At 3.59 with 1.7, it's 220, roughly. This has got about a $2,000 rounding error because the exact numbers would come from Judy. This is relatively close. The $2,000 is easy for us to manipulate. So right now, at 3.59, that's the number you'd be looking at. If you were at 15.15, that's the number, 220 to 470.
Could you put in there, just since we're playing this game, 175 and 3%?
Yep. And 3%. 570.
And the tellers again? is what?
3.64.
6.4.
All right, let's try to 3.59 into 16.
16 what? 1.6 million?
Okay.
Oh,
Well, then 1, or 1.5, whatever.
I really am concerned
No, I
about,
know.
you know,
I
looking
know. So
at the
it's
broader
kind of
picture, and I,
370. It's really a difference of the fund balance, $100,000.
Right. Okay, so we need to make a decision of what we're gonna go with the fund balance. So I think, Charmaine,
You know, I'll go with majority, have the vote. I think we should not, I said the law, I said, bird in the hand, versus what might happen next year. I understand we have a quote surplus, that's not really a surplus this year. I would rather proceed more cautiously, but I'll go with the majority of the board.
okay. And I think the majority of the board wants to do the 1.75. I mean, I kind of agree with that in a way, because hopefully next year we'll get the state aid back, but we've done so many cuts and so much over the past few years, and we finally have money that came back to us. We were gonna originally go with the 1.75, you know, a couple weeks ago before we had some state aid restored. So, I mean, I'm tired of cutting, you know, and jeopardizing all our programs.
you know,
So
the
I
problem,
agree.
I mean, obviously, I'll go with the majority too, but the problem is, you know, I know next year we'll get more. It's election year. I mean, unfortunately, our elected officials look at reelection more important than they do the children of the state. And they also look at it inequitably across the state too. And I won't get into particulars. I don't want to sound like I'm dividing the state into different parts, but you know, the funding formula is inequitable. The gap elimination adjustment, there are wealthier districts in other parts of the state that actually have a lower gap elimination adjustment, less to pay back to the state than we do, and they're wealthier than we are, you know, with similar statistics. Even the star payments made to our taxpayers, I mean, we don't see that. It goes back to our taxpayers. There's an inequitable amount that's given in other areas as opposed to us. And it's not just the rural districts, it's also the small cities, Big 5, and, you know, certainly now the suburban districts too. So I'm just concerned with that. I mean, we can think next year that we're going to get more money, but it'll still be disproportionate unless someone tries to straighten out the whole formula and tries to look at things a little bit more equitably. But considering past history, it doesn't seem.
Government to have some committees to go down to the Capitol.
Well, we
Okay.
can't stop from knocking on those doors, but I'm just saying, even this year, there were people that got a lot more than we did, okay?
So instead of starting in January, maybe we, as a board, should start putting out all that stuff in September, or even over the summer. What?
You're not there till January.
No, okay.
Part-time.
But we can at least, you know.
Well, they have
preview it.
their
You're right.
offices,
We
they have
can
home
find his house.
offices.
Okay, whatever. All right, let's go through, I guess I'm looking right now at the
Wait
deferring
a minute,
projects.
Tom didn't change that number, Diane.
Okay.
Are we gonna change the number?
Mm-hmm,
Okay, change the
yeah,
number.
we have.
Please.
Fine.
Thank you.
Okay. And I guess I'm going back to that original question with that, because it's way down on the list with that deferring projects and purchases for O&M. with the 94,000? Can we do that this year?
Wait a minute, where are you?
It's way
It's
down.
number 20.
Oh, thank you, I should have looked at that first. Number 20.
I would highly
that's
recommend
tech. That's
against
tech.
this.
No, that's
Against
the
it?
10.
Okay.
That's tech, that's
The
tech.
main reason that I would say this,
Yeah,
and
hold on.
I'm not letting Judy
Okay.
comment, because I know she would
16.
say the same
16.
thing, is the fact that that has been this board and the district's trend in the past. We'll put away and defer. We can no longer defer.
No, but I'm saying do
Yeah.
it now,
Uh,
with that extra
That's,
surplus.
a
your
lot of
fund
that is
balance.
equipment. I do not believe the district has that money in equipment. We will try to do everything that we can to advance our position, but those projects, those are contractual projects. If we can, we'll try to get one of them done. But that does not strengthen their position. Remember, they came up with this 94,000 after they have been primarily reduced to the bone.
No, I know, I was trying to give it to them now.
They were just offering that if we had to. They were hoping that it would be low on the priority list. They just cannot keep operating. I mean, it's hard to mow our fields with 42 and 60-inch lawnmowers.
No, I know,
so-
I was just trying to be creative and give it to them now.
Oh,
With our
we're,
surplus.
we've heard you loud and clear on
Okay.
that. We're going to try to do what we can.
Okay. I don't even know where to tackle this.
And I'm not sure I
What Tom is saying is the order. Are we
The
fine with the
order?
order? I'm fine with the order.
I'm not.
Oh, it's up.
Um,
It's right up above.
I would agree with Kate. I'm not in agreement with the sports after looking at what we have here, that we received earlier today, that,
Let me show everyone. I just have to find it. Is that a PDF?
I'm not sure how other people feel about that.
Yeah. Oh,
Feel about
I
what?
mean, if it's, like, maybe it's not even a topic to discuss, if there's only two of us. How do you feel about
I'm
that?
sorry, that
I said
wasn't.
I'm
He's-
fine
he's-
with it
he's
at
trying to- he's trying to
second.
get the thing
I'm
up.
fine with it at second, because no, I totally agree and believe sports are an important part. I think we have an awful lot of outside sports that kids can continue, and maybe there's some way to encourage. I mean, we talked about this a couple of years ago, seeing if the Y can offer more sports or some other ways to get more sports for the kids. But I also think it's a trend going on, and I think, you know, if we're gonna cut something that's still providing sports, and if there are fewer teams, and I would leave it up to the athletic director as to if it's freshman or modified, and it might be different for every team. It might not necessarily be all one level, but whatever's appropriate would be what I would think, and go to the 3 levels. I don't like it. I don't like any of the cuts, but I don't have a problem with it being.
Saratoga, Shaker, Boston aren't cutting. I mean, you know, I think we are a leader, not a follower, anyway. And I think that they're not cutting it, so there are teams for us to play. I don't think playing on a team outside of school and playing on a team for school are the same thing at all.
They're not, they're not.
Not at all.
Nope.
And I think school spirit is worth it. I think the kids learn way too much from it. I mean, you know, there's a lot of people out here of kids my age, when a 13-year-old wants to wear a shirt and tie to school to show that they have a game day, there's a huge amount of pride.
We're not cutting
Yeah.
sports. We're cutting,
tough.
you know, one level
But you are.
of 3.
You're cutting a whole level for a whole year of hundreds of kids who are not gonna be involved in stuff in the afternoon, for a total of $70,000.
I would suggest that we consider doing what Able Park has done. If the freshman level can raise the funds to keep it going, then we'll keep it on, but
We did that.
we have to make cuts somewhere, and I hate to do it to the sports, but it's a significant amount of money. And if there's a real desire to continue the freshman sports, then there's a lot of families out there that could do some fundraising to keep it going.
Fundraising and
Oh, I understand that.
pay for uniforms and equipment and buses and.
Is Mr. DeMayo here?
Yes.
Is he?
Yeah, he is.
John is right.
As the board knows, I emailed Mr. DeMayo several questions, because I really, you know, I like information. What would be the impact on the sports? Because I jokingly said, my daughter plays basketball, she was modified. She's on club teams, and I happened to mention, because the kids come from the club teams, come from different towns, and they said, oh, we cut. So I was wondering what the impact would be, for example, if the freshman level went. because I was jokingly calling it the Uber teams suddenly, because the modified teams, I just know for girls basketball, will become incredibly competitive, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I just know that if we do enact this change, parents should be aware of, if you want your kid to play at the school level, he or she should be practicing and learning some basic skills early on, because there's just no way they will make a team once they get up to the modified level, because the modified team this year was pretty competitive, and there were a couple of, quote, walk-ons who'd never played before. Those kids will not make a team, I would assume, later on. That all said, those 300 comments I read and the 700 I read before were scathing on the priorities on the board. And if you go back and read, I think the bond vote was a message to the board, and the comments are clear that at least the people who chose to vote and chose to write those comments asked the board to focus on the program, and at least the ones I read, and they're up there for everyone to read. So I believe this is not cutting out an entire program. I don't believe it's hundreds of athletes. It will be one team per sport. I understand the values of physical fitness and extracurricular activity. I worked in student affairs for higher ed. I know what it's like to fight for money that's not for an academic program, but this is an amount of money that I believe we need to use, and should we go deeper without taking this cut, it will affect the academic program. And if you, again, I really do take the bond vote as a message to the board, as well as this very specific comments that people provided us with.
Charmaine, I would add to that, though, that the message also to the board was that they supported improvements to our athletic fields. I mean, they didn't support a turf field, and we said let the public decide, is it turf or not. But they supported the improvements to athletic fields, so I don't think it was a message against sports at all.
No, but the comments are very clear.
Well, the numerous emails that we received also were very clear of
Right,
keeping the sports.
Freshmen can play on either modified or JV or varsity, right?
They can, but then it takes away kids from the modified. If a freshman goes down, then a 7th, 8th grader won't be able to play. Or a 9th grader could go on the, how's it work, on the 10th grade, and then the 10th graders, you know what I mean? It still limits the number of kids, regardless. You're wiping out like I don't know, you might know, John, how many kids would this affect? Do you know?
It'd be about 160 to 170 students in freshman level
And
sports.
not all ninth graders will be allowed to play modified. Certain programs have 7, 8, 9.
Oh, okay.
But not all.
Not all. I mean, I guess, go ahead.
John, I mean, we had heard today that another school, or the Suburban Council, is not going to have freshman lacrosse next year as a league across the board. So we know that one would be cut. Are there discussions about any other potential cuts, either at the modified or freshman level for other sports?
Schools talking more freshmen than they are modified.
I think Voorheesville appeared in the spotlight as cutting. Do you know about Voorheesville? Their budget was approved and they cut a level, I believe.
You don't play Warriors. Wasn't approved yet. Has to go by the vote.
Yeah, Voorheesville.
Yeah.
Well, the board approved it,
Yeah.
but not the.
What we have up here, just so that the audience knows, we completed that with John's office, my office today. We tried to verify it as best we can with every school. And we've sorted this so that it's by, like freshman, JV is the middle, and then modified and varsity is on the bottom on this sheet. If you were looking at freshmen, these are all the schools in the Suburban Council. Basically, Bethlehem has a 0 and a question mark because it's not decided yet, but that's a potential. Columbia has an X in it. One of the stipulations on Columbia is they were a recipient of an enormous amount of GEA. So they are going out with a very low potential levy. It's not been decided yet. That's why we have to still put it up as a cut, because their board hasn't decided. But there is a potential recommendation that they're going to restore all of their sports programs that they've already cut. But we received about 260,000 in GEA. They received over $1 million. We don't know why. That's just the formula. However, that's their position, not necessarily ours. As you look, Guilderland is proposing in all their freshmen that it must be 50% funded. If it doesn't get the funding, it may not run. Averill Park is bringing it back, but it's 100% fundraising. I have to caution the board, it's illegal. That's pay for play, and it's 100% funding by the parents. 50%, I think you might be able to get away with, we do it in one of the sports. Mahoneson never had freshman level. Burnt Hills is looking at, they are reducing to 3 levels. It's not a question. The question is which level. They're going to leave it to the coaches to decide. We do not necessarily believe that that is the best way. I know John has had conversations with our coaches, and I believe they said that freshmen would be the preference. If we had to, yes. So that's the freshman level modified, and that's for the fall. Let me show everybody what the winter looks like. Oops, sorry. Here would be the same diagram for winter. There's only 3 freshman sports, there's 4 modified sports. Again, same exact scenario with Columbia, Guilderland, and Averill Park, as well as Burnt Hills, but Niskayuna is going through a budget crisis. They are starting to reduce. I believe that this will not be the first year that they have to reduce, just because I know the amount of fund balance they are using, and we have people on our staff that are also living and residing in the district, and they are challenging the levy now officially at 5.76. That will remain to see whether or not that continues. So that's where the freshman is. For the fall, for the winter, modified, there's more program support across the Suburban Council. Again, I gotta find my cursor. Sorry about that. For there we go. For spring, three sports at the freshman level, which the bottom one is freshman lacrosse. As you've heard, whether they do 100% funding or 50% funding, it's not going to be continued by the section. So that is a reduction that would enter into this either way. However, with baseball and softball, most have the modified program, as you can see throughout in the lower level. And again, Ballston Spa, Burnt Hills, Niskayuna, and Saratoga will not have the lacrosse. Basically, those 3 schools except Saratoga will not have baseball and softball, pending Bethlehem, but the others are at 100%. And I apologize, Guilderland is at 50% there, so that's a typo. So, and then down below is the freshman. I mean the modified for that area as well. So that gives you our best up to date of what everyone's doing that we know of right now. And this obviously is pending budget adoptions. Budget rejections could mean changes as well.
Right. And they could also add them back in, too, at this point.
Right now, if the budget's adopted, that would not necessarily be the case.
These were all adopted?
Well, the ones that we know of have been adopted. If we don't know, we put them as O as potential.
Oh.
The only one is Columbia, where they haven't adopted, but right now it's a cut. They just haven't announced it. And I would ask everybody, please don't run over to Columbia, please. But I know they're having that discussion, I believe, tonight.
Go ahead, Lynn.
We've spent several years cutting positions, and, you know, we've done our best to keep the sports intact. I mean, parents have risen up and certainly have supported sports to a great extent, which has been helpful so we could keep the sports going. And I certainly appreciate all those efforts. But I think we've cut, and I do value sports and what they do for kids. I mean, it's more than just playing the game. It's learning about themselves and relationships, et cetera. And however, you know, we've also cut a lot of faculty over the last couple of years. And I think at some point, you know, despite the fact it's unpopular to do so, I think we need to do that this year. I mean, we do have to do some cutting, but I think the academics have taken a big hit, and I think that we need to cut this level of sports. I mean, I'm not happy about it. I haven't been happy about the cuts for the last several years. As I've said to you before, I can't believe how great it was in the days when we were adding things. And I mean, to me, this has been horrible the last couple of years, but it's also the reality. So,
I just want to clarify, because I know when you spoke, I thought you were saying leave it up to the coaches, modified versus freshman, but I
Not to
believe.
the coaches.
Or the AD. But I believe the recommendation is freshman. Is there a different?
I do believe John made the recommendation at the very first presentation about 6 weeks ago. It was freshman.
Okay. Just to clarify that.
To cut fresh, I guess the recommendation is to cut freshmen and keep modified.
Cut freshmen in every sport?
Yes?
John, is that the recommendation?
Yes.
Just take a vote.
Okay. Can I just say one thing? I know last year, where are we at with your priority
Let me
list?
switch the screen.
Just go up on the priority list of where we are to get to that 220,000.
And that's what I would say is don't necessarily finalize,
No,
because even then, you may still want to alter, because I'm sure
right, that's, I just want to see where we're at.
the administration would probably reposition some depending on what happens above here too, because we do have attrition and we do have excess capacity that we believe would be warranted.
Well, that, I guess that's what I'm thinking with lower enrollment. I mean, can some of these be put up? I mean, I know you've talked about lower enrollment.
But I thought the whole idea was you put them into priority of what you thought should be.
Yes.
I mean, so even if we were to move that number 2 down lower, you're not gonna then redo 3 through 10 or something, are you?
When, like we did last year, when you move, it just recalculates
No,
and
no, no,
resets
no,
your
no,
time.
that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, okay, say, I'm not asking you to do it.
Okay.
But if you were to take number 2 and put it down under 15 or something.
Yep.
3 through 14 or 15 isn't gonna change. That's not gonna change your opinion
No,
on,
if anything,
on
we
that,
move
those
things up.
academic
Right,
things.
right.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm just
If
clarifying
anything,
for
if
what you
moved-
said.
If you moved the 4 sports levels down, we'd move the others up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
In
but
other
you
words,
wouldn't
the hard
reorganize
part
us.
is if the
Yeah.
board chooses that
I
the
know.
program should stay, we've got to cut $70,000 of something
I
else.
understand. I just misunderstood what you
right.
said a minute ago.
But additionally, if the board chooses to make this reduction, there are other reductions that we feel we should probably make and lower our fund balance. That's where our recommendation comes from.
Well, I guess, Tom, what would be those other recommendations? I think that's the
Our
piece that we need.
recommendation that we presented would end up having the reductions go through this area at 1.5, I believe, right, Judy? 1.5 and 3.59. It would require about, I think, 460 or 470. And that would put us right about line 19 or through priority 13.
Why are we
Now-
going backwards? Didn't we already decide we were gonna do the 1.75?
Well, you wanted to see where it would put you. You could add something back in from this reduced by fund balance, and just for 1 year, but you got to fill that hole. But we feel that this recommendation will still, keep a majority, it'll keep our entire athletic program modified through varsity. It will restructure it. It will keep our social work still going forward, although we will restructure our offerings. We will still hit every single mandated program. In this, even with health, PE, facts, guidance, and science, we feel that either through attrition, that some of these positions are attritioning out, or that there is some excess capacity from what we have had from data from the workload in these areas, that we could sustain that. We don't want to, but we could. And improve our financial position to set up next year's budget and potentially the year after that.
But the effects might be larger class size, and I would imagine.
Slightly larger
Right,
class
so,
size,
so
yeah.
it's not just like,
Right.
it's just gonna stay the same.
Right.
Just with fewer staff.
Right.
And I would note that everything under the monitor, besides the guidance and the support services, are part of the, it's academic program.
It's 0.5 for facts.
But you've got the science, you have foreign language.
But you could get rid of the sports level and make it to 220 by only going down to facts and be done. You don't even have to get into social work.
Right, so I'm just saying
science,
anything below.
So what does that look like, Jody, if you would know, like, if you didn't have that .5 as a classroom of, like, class size of 20 would go to 21, or would it be 20 going to 30?
Well, it's high school course reduction, so the teacher would potentially travel. That's a course that right now with course requests are low. It is a class that sometimes fills up second semester. If that were the case, we wouldn't offer that because we wouldn't have the staffing to do it. In regards to the health piece, which was not on one of the initial cut lists, the one how that would be handled is seniors and juniors would get first priority to take health because it's a requirement for graduation. Typically, we've had a lot of sophomores take health. That's when, at one time, we offered it to all the sophomores. Those sophomores, there might be a few who could get it next year, and then the following year likely just be seniors and juniors. One thing to note is that, you know, we could do that for a couple of years, but then in a few years, you're probably looking at adding it back because now you've got all the kids who haven't had health yet. So it would be more of a shorter term solution, but it's something that could be done for probably 2 years and be able to maintain the program and make sure all the kids get those requirements.
Right, and pending our enrollment, that may take care of itself if our enrollment trends continue for the next 3 to 4 years.
Although I will not having a sophomore, and I know we all have had kids go through the system. My son's already planning out his junior, senior schedule, and we prefer that he get health out of the way now, so that he's planning
Absolutely.
physics and chemistry. He doesn't want to have to take a slot for health.
I mean,
Not that it's not a worthwhile course, it's just they're looking to their college admission at that point, and
Sure. A lot of kids would prefer it sophomore
Yeah.
years. And next year, there would be, like I said, some sophomores that could get it, not a lot, but after that, probably they would not be able to get it.
so where are we?
I think. Can we take a break, because it's almost 9 o'clock for our participation in government students? If you just want to come up, sign out, so you have it, but please stay.